ladies and gentlemen. By at least the clock on my computer, it is 10 a.m., so I believe we should make a start. My name is Ryn Smith. I have been appointed on behalf of the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government to examine the Tunbridge Wells Allocations Local Plan. I will introduce at the rear of the room Lynette Duncan, who is the Programme Officer for this examination. I'm sure everybody, if they haven't seen her in person, has at least been in fairly detailed conversation with her via email or correspondence before today. I do note that we've got some people here who have not previously attended an examination session. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the council and provide an opportunity for folks sitting at the table to introduce themselves to each other after I've made one or two preliminary observations about the venue and hearing arrangements for today. We'll be sitting here for the remainder of today and on Wednesday, which is anticipated to be the final day of hearings in this examination. In terms of the use of this room, I'll just point out that toilets, ladies' toilets, the closest, if you leave the room on the doors to my right, turn left into the corridor and proceed to the main stair lobby, turn right into the entrance to the council chamber, and a ladies' cloakroom, so-called, is marked there. That's the nearest ladies' toilet. The nearest gentleman's toilet is directly opposite this room on the other side of the corridor. There are no fire drills expected either today or indeed tomorrow. So if the alarm does sound, as indeed it has once during this examination, it is the real thing and we will need to leave the building. If that occurs, our nearest fire exit is in the corridor. Proceed out of the doors to my right, turn right. There is a door with a crash bar, a panic bar at the end of the corridor. That leads into a stairwell. Down 3 flights leads you to the front of the building on Civic Way. Council staff who are here will act as marshals and escort us from the building should that occur. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll have seen that I'm using a microphone, and indeed I would encourage everybody else so to do, because we are taking a digital audio recording of all of the proceedings here today, and the council has arranged for links to those to be placed on the examination website as part of the examination library. The microphones are operational if you have a red light. It's worth noting that they aren't the most sensitive of microphones, so it's worth making sure that you're not too far away from them when you speak. If I note that the sound recording isn't going quite as well as I would like, then I may ask somebody just to recover a matter that they have just spoken to. You will also have noticed, ladies and gentlemen, that I don't have the typical wall of documents behind me that many local plan inspectors normally have, and that's because we're trying to be as close to paperless as we can be. All of the examination library documents are available to me online and through this laptop, and I will be proceeding accordingly. But in that regard, I will just say that I have been alerted to the fact that there are 1 or 2 problems with the council's wireless service this morning. So if there's anybody needing to use IT, phones, etc., it may well be that you might have issues of intermittency this morning. I'm afraid there's not a great deal that can be done about that. We will just struggle on. The arrangements for these hearings have been set out in a combination of a version 4 programme and agendas that were issued on the 23rd of November. Does everybody who needs to have sight of these 2 documents have them? That's excellent. We will be breaking today at approximately 11:30 for about 15 minutes, although the timing of breaks, I have to say, I take to ensure that people's primary submissions are not disrupted, so there's a certain amount of flexibility there. We will be breaking at 1 p.m. for lunch. We'll resume at 2 p.m. There'll be a break again at approximately 3:30 for 15 minutes, and I aim to conclude the business of the day no later than 5 p.m, and indeed earlier if possible. And in fact, what I would say is, having regard to the agendas for both the morning session and the afternoon session today, it may well be that we don't need all of the time allocated. If that occurs, I'll close the morning session when it ends, but the afternoon session will begin at the advertised time of 2 p.m. Now, noting that there are people in the room who haven't been here before, I will just ask briefly, is there anybody sitting in the rear of the room who considers that they have requested to be heard and ought to be heard this morning, but hasn't found their way to the front table? Okay, now we've got CPRE, and Madam, would you like to just come forward? Take a seat, and I'll just ask the nature of your interest. Maybe if a microphone could just be moved around. So you are Hawkhurst Parish Council. That's excellent. Yes. Good. No, I was expecting you.
I'm sorry. I'm stepping in at the last minute for my chairman, so...
That's absolutely fine. You were on the programme, so in fact your place is at the table. That's entirely as per the arrangements. And CPRE...
We didn't originally ask to be heard because we were content with the allocations as drafted, but seeing that they are being challenged to some extent, we may wish to speak. I won't put my Toblerone up unless I think we have something important to
urgent
contribute.
To say. Well, given the remit of your original written submissions, I think that sounds broadly appropriate to me. I will just check to see if there's anybody here who has any concerns to raise. No. Well, in that case, please do remain here and participate on matters that interest you on a watching basis. Thank you very much. So now we have everybody, I believe, assembled at the table who should be assembled, and I will just explain how the order of the day will proceed and how we will move through the matters on the agenda. Firstly, the examination is of the Council's plan. So the Council, by definition, is invited to speak on every matter and issue in the agenda. The programme, the version 4 programme, records all requests to be heard from other representors next to the matters where the discussion is most relevant to the issues that they have raised. And what I will aim to do is to provide those representors with an opportunity to involve themselves in the particular matters that are most relevant to their submissions. Only representors who've requested to be heard are entitled to speak. Papers that have been provided in advance are taken as read. I have read them, and I trust everybody here has indeed read them. And so they don't need to be presented as submissions in chief. Discussion will move directly to the key points that arise from them, taking account of the Council's and other representors' written positions. So what interests me most, and one of the greatest benefits of an oral hearing at this stage in a local plan examination, is essentially the interactions between what has been written. This is the opportunity to join the dots. I will normally start the discussion of a matter by seeking involvements from representors. And then I will move to the Council once all representors on a matter have been heard and allow the Council to make a consolidated conclusion of their position in relation to all matters. Now, there have been a number of instances during the hearings over the last few days where issues of site-specific detail have arisen, or interactions between different representors' positions have arisen that mean that actually there then needs to be an iterative process, a second round. If it becomes necessary, if you believe that you want to be engaged again, you can signal to me, and I'll show you the method of signalling. I'm sure a number of folk here are familiar with it, but if you want to speak on a matter, raise your nameplate, your Toblerone like that, and that sends me a superb semaphore signal that you want to be involved, and I'll make sure that I bring you in before the conclusion of discussion on that matter. When you finish speaking, if you return your Toblerone to a flat position, that means that I won't be worried that I somehow haven't involved you. So that, again, helps me to manage the hearing. So I'd be very grateful if you could follow that advice. And what I would also say is that there is no need to reiterate material that others have said. So if you have heard something that somebody else has said, and it's something that you wish to provide emphasis to or support, it's sufficient just to raise your Toblerone and when introduced say, we support the submissions of the parish council, or we support the submissions of Countryside Properties, for example. So the burden of what they say does not have to be repeated. So what I'd like to do now, with no further ado, is to move around the room. I'll start with the council and I'll move in this direction and ask for introductions. Mr. Hinton.
Good morning, sir. I'm Kelvin Hinton. I'm the Planning Policy Manager with the Borough Council.
Good morning. My name is Adrian Tofts and I'm Planning Policy Team Leader with Tunbridge Wells Borough Council.
Morning. Sharon Evans, Senior Planning Officer within the Planning Policy Team, Tunbridge Wells Borough Council. Thank you very much to the Council. Now, CPRE.
Elizabeth Aikenhead, Chairman of the Tunbridge Wells District Committee of the Campaign for Protection of Rural England.
Thank you very much.
Margaret Brinsley, Vice Chairman of Hawkhurst Parish Council.
Thank you very much.
Jo Tasker from Robinson Escott Planning, representing Mr Perry in relation to a site in Bidborough Ridge.
Can I just ask that you slightly rotate your Toblerone so that I can actually see it? That's excellent.
John Perry, resident of Bidborough. But could I just confirm, sir, because the agenda seems confused, am I speaking this morning or this afternoon at 2 o'clock?
I would envisage that you are speaking this afternoon at 2 p.m, sir, because that is a settlement within the villages and rural areas. If I can just confirm with the council that's correct. It's not within the development boundary of Hawkhurst or the associated daughter settlements.
No, so that's correct. It will be the villages.
So, sir,
may I be excused until 2 o'clock?
You may absolutely be excused until 2 p.m.
Yeah, we were advised that we should be here at 10.
Well, I do apologise for that. The agenda had been structured in a manner such that we'd split Hawkhurst from other balance of rural area settlements so that people didn't have to attend for the entire day. And given that we will... no, look, I was tempted to say I'll hear you at the end of Hawkhurst, but on balance and in fairness to others who are attending for the villages and rural areas, they may have wished to hear what you have to say. So I think we should stick to the advertised time and we should do that business at 2 p.m.
Is it correct that there's nothing happening this morning that we should be involved with?
Unless you have a particular interest in relation to Hawkhurst itself, then the answer to that question is no. We've been structuring the hearings as per the chapter structure of the plan. So if you want to take 5 minutes in the corridor and just check the content of the plan, feel free. But unless there's something in that Hawkhurst chapter that is of concern to your client, my advice to you would be come back at 2.
We'll do that. Thank you. Thank you.
Apologies.
Good morning. I'm Graham Clark from Aubrey Estates. I'm acting on behalf of Bellaway Homes at Woodham Hall, and my nameplate is not quite correct. I'm also acting for David Weeks at the Springfield Garden Centre, which is the other allocation in the village. Thank you.
Well, that is noted. One point that I will make briefly, just so that everybody is conscious of the fact that, when I introduce you into discussion, I may well just refer to Bellway because that's what's on your Toblerone, but when the report is written, of course, I will go back and ensure that you are tagged to your respective clients. Okay. And finally, Countryside Properties.
Yes, David Bedford of DHA Planning, purely on behalf of Countryside Properties today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those introductions. Now then, if we move on to the agenda, the first matter that we have is a business session, Matter J, where we deal with essentially matters carried forward or outstanding matters from earlier sessions and arrangements for business moving forward. I've only got one or two very simple matters to deal with. Firstly, I will flag that I intend this morning to have distributed a letter annexing a table capturing the actions that arose from last week's hearings. That, I've titled it an interim table, simply because we've still got hearings today, so it's not complete. I would also flag, particularly for the council, that I would like to discuss the items raised within it in tomorrow afternoon session, so that we are of a shared understanding about the nature of the actions. Now, anybody who has any interest in any of the earlier hearings is invited to and welcome to participate in that session as well. That's tomorrow afternoon from 2 p.m. The letter is with the programme officer now. I'm sure it'll proceed out at some point this morning. I would also flag that another agenda item for discussion in tomorrow afternoon's session will be the need for the council to draw together a consolidated schedule of modifications, because we've had a number of documents that have proposed a number of modifications, some of which are main, some of which are not, and we've also had modifications on the modifications. And it becomes, I think, necessary for there to be a single master document that's drawn together, referencing all of the various changes and whether or not they're still live. So I'm not proposing that we discuss the arrangements for that now, but we will be discussing the arrangements for it tomorrow afternoon. So I'll flag that as well. Other than that, I have no preliminary items. Is there anything that anybody else needs to raise about the arrangements for the remainder of the hearings? No. In which case, let's move to Matter H, which is Hawkhurst, Highgate, the Moor and Gills Green. Now, essentially here, ladies and gentlemen, I think probably the best way to proceed will be to seek the engagement of those representing clients in relation to individual sites first, to then come to the CPRE, who will have a different but overarching perspective for the whole of the settlement, as I would take it, and then come to the parish council as custodian of the town as a whole. Can I just check, town or village? What is preferred?
We are a village.
I will make sure.
And I believe within the site allocations we are being reverted back to a village. It was a sort of one of these anomalies that suddenly appeared in 2010, and no one knew quite what we were. but we are a village.
I note that. I will make sure that my references are always to the village of Hawkhurst.
Thank you very much.
So I will come to you, and then I will come to the council for overarching responses to everybody's positions, and then, as I've said, we'll have an iterative process if we need one. So we barely need to, but I do note CPRE, who've sat through many of these sessions now, have got their Toblerone raised. Is this on an introductory matter? It is.
Inspector, it might save time if we speak after the parish council.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to waste time by inquiring as to why, but I'm reasonably happy. So, Countryside Properties, Bellway. Would Countryside Properties care to lead?
Yes, please, thank you. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak. As most, I think, people here will be aware, we are promoting land at Highgate Hill as an allocation that should be included. We think the plan should be modified and the site should go back in. You'll also be aware that there was 2 appeals, or a conjoined appeal for 2 planning applications that was allowed back in October, which granted full and outline consent for 62 homes on the site. Much has been said about the appeal decision, and it's been a topic for housing supply excuse me, debates at the earlier sessions. But I just wanted to firstly say that actually, I think there's always been a very good relationship between Countryside Properties and Tunbridge Wells. And I just wanted to recap over the process that we have been through to get to where we are. So it was always Countryside Properties' intention to seek an allocation, and that was always the priority. The decision to take forward any form of planning application was based solely on the very, very strong evidence base that had been prepared in respect of the emerging site allocations DPD, and also partly because the council at the time were defending against an application for permission at Fowler's Park. So we were encouraged to submit on the basis that the evidence base supported the site and it would help oppose Fowler's Park. Duly obliged, and the rest is history. We are where we are. We faced the appeal, and the appeal was successful. But it goes back to the original objective was to seek an allocation, and we still think that there are very, very sound planning reasons, or very genuine planning reasons why, without the allocation of Highgate Hill, that the plan can't be sound. Series of issues that I'll pick up on a issue-by-issue basis. First of all is the evidence base. Highgate Hill was included as a proposed allocation up until the preferred option stage, or just before the preferred option stage, where through the political process the site was deleted. That was strongly recommended to members that didn't happen because of the evidence base in place at the time, and the fact that there was very significant doubts about the deliverability of sites such as Springfield Garden Centre and Woodham Hall. Again, the decision was made and the site came out of the plan. We don't feel enough has been done still to demonstrate that those sites are deliverable and will come through in the plan period, and that the evidence base is not sufficiently robust to show how that change and shift has occurred from being undeliverable to deliverable. Next, a knock-on impact of not having the certainty of those sites coming forward is where the flexibility comes in the plan. What happens if the 40 or 50 sites from Springfield Garden Centre in particular doesn't come forward? There's no ability to rapidly respond to change as is required within the presumption in favour of sustainable development. And fundamentally, our position hasn't changed. I'll pretty much leave it at that, but just want to be clear that I appreciate that a 10-unit scheme has now been submitted for Springfield Garden Centre. But again, that doesn't show to me that the site is going to come forward in the numbers that are expected. It actually shows me that those constraints are genuine, and had there been an opportunity to bring forward the rest of the numbers in the plan period, then it would have been done in a coordinated and well-planned way. Likewise, we are aware that Woodham Hall, an application is imminent, but again, the same conversations have been had from the, as dating back as far as the Fowler's Park inquiry. So don't get me wrong, we're not in a position where we think it's a beauty contest and that we should be included at other sites' expense. The fact of the matter is that we have a deliverable site that has planning permission where there should be shovels in the ground as early as probably next summer. But it still needs to go into the plan. If something untoward was to happen and there was a need to revisit, there needs to be that certainty that the site is the preferred option for Hawkhurst. Likewise, we think it's desperately needed for the flexibility and to ensure that the SADPD delivers what it's set out to do, and that's implement the numbers set out in the core strategy. Thank you.
Now, thank you very much for those submissions, which clearly summarise and draw out at a high level the more detailed written submissions that I've received on your behalf. Firstly, in relation to those, I mean, I clearly understand that you are seeking an allocation, notwithstanding the planning permission that you benefit from at appeal. I'm going to put a question to you about that, and then I'm going to put the reverse question to council, so if they can hold it in mind and answer it when they come to respond. My question to you is essentially a simple and practical one, which is to ask what particular benefit in planning terms is delivered by the allocation of a site that already has planning permission and that is, in your evidence, and indeed I don't believe we're going to hear evidence to the contrary, spade ready.
I mean, that's a perfectly fair question, and we don't envisage that there is going to be anything that delays us from implementing the planning permissions. So I can see the perspective that actually, when all said and done, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. But there is always the opportunity that something could go wrong. I mean, we are dealing in the development industry with contracts and legals and all sorts of elements that could impact on deliverability. I don't think it will happen, but if contracts weren't to be concluded in the way that we think they would be, or new terms were suggested and there was a need to go back and revisit the planning permission, we wouldn't want to find ourselves in a position whereby we have to once again go back and go through the planning and potentially appeal process to get to where we need to be. Likewise, it's as a policy planner, I genuinely feel that the plan needs the site. I think it's all about positively planning for the housing numbers that need to be delivered, and to rely on a local plan allocation that hasn't come through in the good times has no significant evidence of coming forward in the immediate future. It's as much in the interest of good planning as well.
Now, I hear that second point, and I am coming back to it. However, in relation to my first question, the kind of obverse question to the council, which also raises an issue that I want to test with you, is that the council's latest position is that they now include the appeals site as a constituent part of revised 5-year housing land supply figures that have been put in to this examination as essentially a means to rebut submissions by others that there is not an adequate 5-year housing land supply. So the question to you is, do you consider that it is a site that is deliverable within that timescale?
Absolutely, yeah. I don't believe there's any doubt, and I genuinely sit before you today. I don't think there will be any need to revisit the planning permission. I think the developers are happy with what's approved. I think they've done it in the right way. It's been a landscape-led scheme. It's always been a very well-planned development. Simply speaking, we're just looking to try and cover our bases in the event that we have taken a long time to get to the planning permission that possibly shouldn't have needed as long as it did. It has overwhelmingly been the preferred site. And what we don't want to do is find ourselves, if they're in the 1 or 2% chance of having to revisit the planning application, that we have to go through all of those struggles again. It's a practicality. We're trying to cover bases, but I think these representations should in no manner be taken as that the site isn't deliverable within a 5-year period.
Okay. And then the reverse question, as I've indicated to the council, which is essentially to say, to the extent that this site is relied on as part of the housing land supply evidence base for the plan as it currently rests, is there an argument that it should be allocated? I mean, you can pick that up afterwards. I don't need you to respond to it now, but it's the reverse of the point that I've just made to Countryside Properties. Now, before we move on, there were broader points made in your submissions about the possible, I guess, doubt or concern that some other sites might have delivery issues. Now, I'd like you to, you've made those. They're in the basket. They're in writing. I'd like you to just move into them in a little more detail orally, simply because them having been made, it is clearly something that I'll have to give careful consideration to in terms of whether the balance of other evidence suggests that there are other concerns with the sites that you've referred to. And so I would like to hear from you, I guess, see the colour of your eyes, for want of a better description, in terms of the basis for your reaching those conclusions of concern about those sites.
Yes, and again, to a certain degree, I'd flip it on its head and say that I'd almost refer it back to the council's own evidence base. I mean, I think it's the 2013 Hawkhurst site templates are very clear when they suggest that Highgate Hill should be allocated, that sites such as Springfield Garden Centre aren't deliverable. I think one of the core reasons is the fragmented land ownership issues and actually the physical deliverability of that particular site. When you get to the 2015 site template updates, there's some generic text about the sites now being deliverable, but it's the physical evidence to underpin that. How are these land ownership issues being overcome? And that's the area where we generally don't feel that the decision is evidence-based. The elephant in the room is the fact that it was a political decision. It was the members, I think, contrary to officers' advice. The officers spent the time at the committee meeting where the decision was being made, suggesting that there isn't the justification, there isn't the planning basis to make these decisions. And I'm yet to see the physical evidence that those constraints that were identified and deemed Springfield Gardens as not being deliverable in the 2013 site templates, how they were overcome, and that the council can have such certainty by the time we get to the 2015 templates that the site is deliverable. I couldn't be definitive, but I think for soundness purposes, if you have a site that has planning permission that is going to come forward in the next 6 to 9 months, and a site that hasn't come forward even as an allocation since 2006 or beyond, the way that the system is stacked at the moment is you have to go for that positive planning approach, and it's about getting the houses built. So again, I'm not sure that I can add much more than that, other than our conclusions are based on the fact that we haven't seen the evidence to override to see the council override its earlier previous decision.
And just to be clear, it is not a suggestion on your part that Springfield Garden Centre is not allocatable.
No, it was a previous local plan allocation, and
it's your observation that it hasn't demonstrated its...
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. We're all a lot of planners in the room. If it was deliverable in a single ownership, it's a partially previously developed site that should take priority over a greenfield AONB site. The fact of the matter is that we feel that the AONB land has had to be released on the basis that, A, there's the overwhelming need, but because these sites aren't coming forward, they're not being delivered in the way that the council has expected them to be delivered. And that was part of the exceptional circumstances that were part and parcel of the planning permission being granted.
Well, when the council summarise their position, again, if we're talking about where more detail needs to emerge orally, that's a topic that does need to be addressed, because I would like to hear the council's view on the deliverability of other proposed allocations in the village, but particularly that one. And I just wanted to check, I mean, Springfield is your main concern. Other sites, other allocations?
Yes, I mean, Springfield is the biggest issue because of the numbers that are relied upon at the site. Woodham Hall is much smaller. I think we're talking 10 or 12 on the main element of the site. So it's less of an issue in respect of the deliverability. Even if that was to come forward, you would still need Springfield Garden Centre to be delivered to meet the core strategy numbers. So that's the critical site.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we can probably move on. So, in summary terms, Bellway, but noting the wider representations.
Thank you very much, sir. First of all, I'd like to say that we support the Borough Council's acceptance of the two allocations at Springfield and Woodham Hall under document PS49, and also the Kent County Council Highways Department's letter of the 24th of November 2015, where they accept that there's no highway constraint to those allocations being confirmed. And I think in terms of the Borough Council's document PS49, we wouldn't disagree with them that there's now a surplus of about 47 units in Hawkhurst. It might be helpful if I was to describe where we are with progress with both Springfield and Woodham.
I think in the light of the remarks that have just been made by Countryside Properties, and before we move to others, that would be very, very helpful indeed.
Springfield Garden Centre is in 4 ownerships. I act for 2 of the owners, David Weeks and John Kavanagh. They have an agreement with a company called Esquire Developments, who have now put an application in for 9 units on the front part of the site. That provides a new road access onto the A299, and will take a road up to the balance of the site and services to enable the wider site to be developed. My understanding is, I have been in contact with the other 2 owners over time, but my understanding is that Esquire Developments are now talking to a 3rd owner. And we would hope that at some point the balance of the site can be brought forward. Woodham Hall is in single ownership.
Now, can I just stop you there, just to confirm that the plan is drawing number 22335A/06, annexed, I believe, to the rear of your submissions.
Oh.
That's the application plan for the front 2 ownerships. And I just it appears as though it does, but I just wanted to confirm that the access and road arrangement within that application, as shown, enables the remainder of the allocation site to be served.
It does, sir, and there's an obligation in the contract for the developers of Esquire Developments to bring a road to the western boundary and services to enable an adopted road and services to be extended into the balance of the site.
Thank you very much.
So Woodham Hall, it's in single ownership. They have a contract with Bellway Homes to develop the site. I have been nagging them continuously, sir, in an attempt to get a planning application in prior to the opening of this inquiry, but I haven't quite succeeded. But I'm promised that the application will go in before the end of this month. They're currently proposing a scheme for 17 units, including 35% social, in accordance with policy. They also have a contract on the back part of the site, area 217, which we would contend has the potential for about 8 units, and that's supported in the council's capacity documents. There would appear to us, sir, to be a lot of logic in allocating that site, in that it's in the same ownership as Woodham Hall, and access would be derived to it from Woodham Hall. Within the site is covered by brambles, so there are no trees within the site, and it is very well screened from the wider landscape. So we don't believe it will be visible in the wider landscape and hence not impact severely on the AONB. The other point I would like to make, sir, and I made these points in my statement to you, is that I am very concerned about the council's overall allocations and the housing and land supply position. And I've been struggling to sort of keep up with the swapping of documents that have gone back and forth between Gleeson's and Gladwin's and Tunbridge Wells on 5 years. I sat here this morning trying to work out where the council probably was, and they seem to be claiming a sort of 6.6-year supply at the moment. Sorry, I wasn't going to go on long.
Yes, I mean, essentially what I was going to say is that, plainly we have already had, detailed oral hearings on the issues of principle raised, and I very consciously sort of separated those from hearings in relation to villages and towns and allocations and policies within villages and towns. And of course, I have read your written submission. I mean, the latest position, I believe, is set out for the council is set out in their document 37, where they do set out a basis for their view that they have more than a 5-year housing land supply to meet core strategy requirements, and they set out the sites that they suggest lead them to that conclusion. But others have disagreed with that, and at the relevant sessions in these hearings have put their views to me. Now, what I guess I wanted to check, because what I don't want to do is to rehear matters that are already heard, but I do note your concerns. What I just wanted to check was whether what you have written in the document that I have from you now, your latest written statement, whether that takes account of the council's position in their document 37 or not.
Thank you, sir. It doesn't.
Right.
I mean, very briefly, I think the position is, if I've understood it correctly, is the council have added into the 5-year supply site at Maskell's, Union House, Tunbridge Wells, and of course the Highgate Hill decision. But what they have not taken into account are the question marks over the supply at Knights Park, various conversions of offices to residential in Tunbridge Wells, and the gas holder site at Sandhurst Road. And I think there are very big question marks. And I sat here with my calculator early this morning, and I think they are still, even if you delete those sites and add in Maskell's, Union House and Highgate Hill, I think they've only just got a 5-year supply. And I still think there are question marks, especially about Maskell's and Union House. So I think, to sum up my arguments, it is that the supply is definitely questionable. I think there's some smoke and mirrors going on here about what contributes towards that supply. And I think they need to find some more sites which genuinely are deliverable within the 5-year period. Just one final comment, and then I'll shut up, sir. The 5-year supply calculation is based on the 300 units per year. Come next year, the council are going to have to look at their OAN, which is going to be over 648 units per annum. So that 5-year supply, 2016 onwards, could be in a very, very precarious position unless some attention is paid to the supply now.
It could indeed. And without second-guessing what the council will say, I suspect that they will tell us, as indeed they already have in a number of the earlier sessions, that they are promoting a replacement local plan for those purposes, and that is, they assure me, on a reasonably fast track, faster than might necessarily be assumed, bearing in mind that we're looking at an allocations plan under the current core strategy now.
So I did print off their development plan timescale, which I think shows a draft by the end of next year. To be honest, I think I'm more likely to win the Euro Millions rollover lottery than that local plan being put in place within 12 months of today. I'm sorry, I just find it very unlikely.
So you have remaining reservations.
Some minor reservations, sir.
Which proceed from
experience, sir. I've planned over many, many years, and I haven't yet known a plan to go from inception to publication in 12 months. I hear what the council say, but the political ramifications of trying to get through that number of units, 600, for an OAN of 650 units per annum, in 12 months to get that plan published in that timescale, I just find very difficult to contemplate.
Okay. Now, clearly you've made those points, and I just need to test. It appears obvious, but just to test the basis on which you have made them, which is essentially, firstly, to ensure that you have a foundation stone for your proposition that the sites you currently act for should not be removed from the allocation. Step one. Step two, proposition that there is additional land that could be allocated that you would like taken into consideration. Does it go any further than that? Is there anything else that I need to be taking account of from your representations?
No, sir. Essentially, my representations are that I support the allocations at Springfield and Woodham Hall, and that the small extension to Woodham Hall should be allowed through this allocations document.
Okay. Now, you heard Countryside Properties reservations, particularly about the Springfield site, and we've heard that 2 of 4 owners and possibly a third are now active. We've also heard that there's a contractual basis for ensuring good access to the rear of the site, and we've also seen an application for planning permission for the front of the site. It may be that you're just not instructed, but can you add anything to, I guess, the current position on the 2 out of 4 owners or 1 out of 4 owners at the rear of the site, and assumptions that have been made about the yield of the site overall and timescales for development of the site overall at Springfield?
I do think that the provision of the access in the centre of the site onto the A229 will clarify that issue. There's been a lot of debate historically about where the access should go between the landowners. And I think the granting of consent for the 9 units on the front part of the site will clarify that situation. And I think also the removal of the two front owners, in other words, their part of the site will have been developed, will focus the minds of the two rear owners. To be honest, the big issue is what to do with the commercial units in the middle of the site, and the aspirations of that owner in relation to those.
Because my site inspection, which I did on an unaccompanied basis, suggests that those are still in living uses.
Yeah, they're in
semi-living uses.
Yeah, there's about a dozen units in there. You'll see there's some dog grooming, there's some storage concept, there's some kitchen manufacturing units. They're very small, low-key units. It is the extent to which those need to be, if they do need to be relocated, or whether there's a deal to be done between the middle owner and the back owner about how you apportion the value between those two sites. But as I say, I think the fact that there's now a roadway onto the A229 and that the front part of the site will be developed will clarify their thinking.
Okay. I mean, other practicalities such as, say, for example, unexpired duration of leaseholds over units?
No, I've had this discussion with the middle landowner on a number of occasions. The units in the centre of the site are on short-term licences. There's no long-term leases or tenancies which will restrict the development of that part of the site.
And it probably goes as stated, but again, I felt I ought to check whether if there are literally licences to occupy there, that those have been granted taking specific account of the fact that they may need to be surrendered in short term because the site might move to another use.
It's difficult for me to say so because I'm not instructed by the middle landowner. But my understanding is that he's got the ability to get vacant possession in a very short order of time if that part of the site was to come forward for development.
I think that's brought me to the end of the kind of in principle hearing of your position. Now, Countryside Properties, is that a brief observation on what you've just heard?
Sorry, excuse me. There's various bits and pieces that I'd like to come back to in respect of what Bellway have said. I'm happy to do that after we've heard from.
Yeah,
whenever's the most appropriate.
I think probably the best thing to do will be to run essentially a brief second round once everybody has had their kind of fair first go. So, CPRE have asked to sit to the rear of Hawkhurst Parish Council. Can I hear from Hawkhurst Parish Council in allowing you to proceed in that order, though? There is somewhat of a danger that matters might arise in CPRE's submission that the Parish Council want to respond to. You know, in fairness, I'll have to allow that to take place. So let's hear from the Parish Council and see how we go.
If it's all right, I'd like to read the statement that my chairman prepared first.
Okay. Now, I don't believe that that's been put in as a document yet, and Lynette Duncan is nodding her head. What we did have was a deadline before these hearings commenced for written documents to be placed in, simply so that we don't actually need to read things verbatim, and also so that everybody's as well briefed as they can be. But I am also conscious of the fact that it probably contains the position of the parish council, and if I tell you can't say it, there's not much use in you carrying on. What I'm going to suggest is, have you got a document there that you can get copied and circulate?
Yes, I did actually, because sorry, this is very last minute, I did make one copy.
Right.
But I'm quite happy to ad lib if you would rather.
I actually would prefer, given that you have a written document, I would have preferred it if it had come in at the relevant deadline. It hasn't.
I'm very sorry.
I think the next best thing is actually to get it copied out so that the rest of the participants can see it, and then you can make a submission on it based on the fact that we know what's in issue. What I'm going to suggest we do, and this is that issue that I raised earlier about taking the breaks when they naturally fall. Why don't we break now, resume at 10 past, by which point that document will have been copied, everybody will have it, and then we can proceed seamlessly, because hopefully it's not a long document, we'll have read it by then too.
Thank you very much. No, it's not very long. But as I say, I'm quite happy to ad lib.
No, let's stop.
Yeah.
We'll come back at 10 past and we'll proceed on the basis of a known and circulated document. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm grateful to Hawkhurst Parish Council for arranging the circulation of their document, which I've now read, and I trust everybody else has had an opportunity to review that. So, would you like to present your position?
Good morning, everyone. Basically, I'm just an ordinary person, and I speak for the ordinary people of Hawkhurst. That's the residents. Where we are concerned is that we were allocated 240 houses back in 2010, which we accepted because we do appreciate that Hawkhurst, like every other village, has to organically grow. Our big concern has always been the crossroads, which Kent County Council Roads Department fully admit is already above capacity. Unfortunately, we are one of the HGV main lorry routes. So it has been stated time and time again to the residents that we would only have to provide 240 units. Now, the residents' other concern, quite rightly, and in conjunction with the core strategy, was that brownfield sites should be considered first. Hawkhurst is fully aware that we are surrounded by AOMB. I personally am a farmer, therefore I have a real thing about good quality farmland being used because it's an irreplaceable resource. But we also appreciate the whole borough is surrounded by AOMB. So we do realise that the borough itself does have problems. Hawkhurst has worked incredibly hard to try and meet its allocation in what it felt was the right sites and in the right way, to the extent that we now actually have 267 units approved, and the plan still has 11 years to go. So no one can accuse Hawkhurst of not being proactive. But the residents fail to understand, and I feel quite rightly, when we do our best, we're not against building. We do have a horrendous problem in the middle of our village. As any resident would tell you, it took me 35 minutes to get out of Hawkhurst this morning. A village. That is normal in rush hour.
If it's any consolation, I have undertaken unaccompanied site inspections. I've visited Hawkhurst on 2 occasions. I have passed across the crossroads, and I have experienced the need to hop from parked vehicle to parked vehicle to move up the road to access that junction. So I'm aware of the nature of the concerns that have been raised.
Basically, to sum up, Hawkhurst is a village. It's quite prepared to grow organically. But we feel that despite any efforts that we make, and remember, us parish council members, we are volunteers. When the borough had problems with Springfield, which we didn't hear about until after the last consultation documents were produced, we then went to the landowners ourselves, and hence this is why we're in the position we are. We just feel that we don't count. I think, to be honest, that sums it up. We do everything we should, including doing a neighbourhood plan, and despite our constraints, and we do realise that in the next round we probably will have to look at some AOMB land, but we're walked over.
So to draw that together, as I see it, your view is that the Highgate Hill appeal having been granted, because that is a thing that has been granted, that there is a planning permission there, you would now take it that Hawkhurst is supplying more housing land than it ought, and it would be your... I mean, are you going so far as to suggest that sites that have been proposed to be allocated should not be?
No, I'm not, because both those sites are basically brownfield sites. Springfield is within the limits to build. And they were our preferred sites, as I say, because the borough didn't have its housing numbers. Highgate Hill was given planning permission. It was nothing to do with Hawkhurst numbers, it was the borough's numbers. Yeah. That is the difficulty. No, the residents support the 2 sites that we allocated, because if they're not developed, they simply become grot spots. And we don't want that. We're just putting our position that we feel we're overrided.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, I did have some questions that emerged from your written document, which relate to the neighbourhood plan. Because you say there that it qualifies as an emerging NDP, and therefore you say that it should be taken into consideration when planning decisions are taken and when forming policy. What I wanted to then just check on, because the neighbourhood plan in its current form is not something that's been put in front of me yet. was whether you were relying on it to deliver yet further or different housing sites from those that are proposed to be allocated in this plan, or have otherwise received planning permission, such as the Highgate Hill site.
We anticipate that in the next round, when the borough reassesses its housing situation, that Hawkhurst, despite its traffic problems, might be required to provide some housing. The parish council is trying to think maybe even 10 years forward. So with the residents, we are looking at what possibly could be potential sites for growth in about 10 years' time. We're trying to be forward-thinking, and by the residents deciding on what sites they feel would be acceptable, we hope we're not in this situation again.
Indeed, and I mean that therein lies, a strong part of the rationale for neighbourhood plans from the starting point. I guess what I'm trying to work out is whether I need to look at the current draft neighbourhood plan and take it into account when weighing up housing land availability in Hawkhurst and when considering the various submissions that have been put to me on the proposals that are in this plan. Now, the sense that I'm getting from what you're saying is that the answer to that question is probably not, because one, you're content with the allocations that have been proposed for Hawkhurst that are on previously developed land, and two, the main task of the neighbourhood plan as you see it is to frame yourself with community consent to face the emerging local plan. Am I correct?
No, you're completely correct. Because as I said, the village is quite happy with the sites they allocated. We are trying to be very forward-thinking.
Indeed. Okay. Well, look, unless anybody else raises it and says that they believe I ought to consider the draft neighbourhood plan at this stage, if the parish council are advising me that its main task is to deal with the future housing requirement, then I think the best thing to do is not to draw it in. Does everybody broadly agree with that? Everybody does. So we don't need a copy, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, we don't need a copy of the neighbourhood plan in its current form. Okay. I think everything else from that is clear and self-evident. So I don't have any further questions on the material that you've just put this morning. So is there anything else by way of a conclusion that you want to put to me?
I don't think so, sir. I think we've always made our position very clear, and I think from the documentation that you've already received from us, you actually realise that Hawkhurst is a very, very active community. But we do think it's important that us little people are heard and taken notice of. And I think this is our problem. But thank you very much indeed.
Well, indeed. And, I trust that this has been a process that has enabled you to be heard and has enabled your views to be taken account of. Thank you very much. Now, let's move to CPRE.
The reason I asked to speak after the parish council was because I suspected, and indeed it is the case, that we would support what the parish council has said, particularly in their written statement. I would add one thing on site capacity, and I turn to the application made by made on the part of the Springfield site. We would suggest that the application to build 7 detached houses and just 2 semi-detached is not unconnected with the fact that 10 houses is the threshold for providing affordable housing. We think that that particular site could take more.
I note what you have said. I've already indicated that there's going to be an iterative round in matters Hawkhurst, and I think I'll allow that to be picked up at that time. So I'm going to go to the council now for their in principle response to everything that's been put. Who's leading on this? Mr. Hinton.
Thank you, sir. I think we can present the council's position quite simply. As you would expect, the council's position is that the plan is sound as submitted on the basis of the allocations made within it. The allocation promoted at Highgate Hill will not of itself add to housing supply. As we're aware, planning permission already exists, and we've been told on a number of occasions that work can start on site quickly and it can be delivered within a short timescale. As regards the sites that are currently allocated in the draft plan, you've heard up-to-date submissions today regarding the position on both of those sites and how they may come forward over the planned period. These sites, we acknowledge, have been in the mix for some time. However, the discussions and information available to the council in the lead-up to the plan preparation and this examination and confirmed from the comments made today has given the council increased confidence that these sites will be delivered in the planned period. It should be noted that in terms of reliance on the 5-year supply, we are only including those elements which are currently the subject to the application recently submitted and the application which is due imminently. The greater part of the garden centre site, which amounts to some 30-odd units, is not in the 5-year supply, and the council is expecting that to be delivered and come forward in the latter period of the plan. So in conclusion, sir, the council's position is that if notwithstanding our submissions and the evidence that you've seen and heard regarding delivery of the currently allocated sites, if you still have concerns regarding those allocations and conclude that in order to provide flexibility, as referred to in para 14 of the framework, the extra allocation, if you decided that on that basis the extra allocation should be made, the council, whilst it believes it's not necessary, would not have a overriding concern with that recommendation, sir.
Okay. Now, I've got some questions in relation to some of the individual allocations, which do touch on some of the allocations that are within Hawkhurst more broadly, but that haven't been a matter of contention here. But I think just running through them in policy order, starting with HA1, the garden centre, what is missing from the proposed policy for that site, but you have put in place on other sites in multiple land ownerships where there are, I guess, coordination issues around access, delivery, etc., is a master plan type measure. I'm using those words very loosely, but simply to observe that in a number of the more complex, either larger sites or town centre sites, the council has routinely set out a proposal for the preparation of a master plan. Given what we've heard about that site, and given the fact that we've got some still occupied commercial units in it, would there be any virtue in including a master plan provision, and like all of the other ones that we've spoken about, making clear in explanatory material that the council will champion that if no one else does?
Thank you, sir. The policy as currently drafted does contain a bullet point that proposals for redevelopment of part of the site must not prejudice the eventual development of the whole allocation.
Yeah,
so
it's kind of how far are you going?
Yeah, there's
really
an inference there as to the objective. I think, speaking off the top of my head, I wouldn't necessarily promote the term master planning for this site, but you are quite right that in the previous sessions on other sites we have agreed to proffer modification which would give a message of more proactive involvement by the council in its role as local planning authority to ensure that the desired objectives of the site were met. And I think we could have another look at the wording currently drafted and look about possibly promoting a further modification which enhances that message in the policy work, in the policy wording.
Now, what I will say here is I will obviously come back to the relevant representors before we finalise that. But if we end up going down that road, what I've done previously is I've set essentially a deadline for the council to prepare some form of paper and a further deadline for those affected by it to review it and provide some form of response, so that that's a written process that can then occur without there needing to be a further hearing, unless people object gravely to it. So that was the observation about Springfield. I mean, you've heard the reservations from Countryside Properties on Springfield, but you've also heard the submissions for the various clients, not Bellway Homes, in relation to that site. I take it that you're content that your view about deliverability on that site hasn't radically changed in the light of what you've heard?
No, it hasn't radically changed, and indeed in hearing the most up-to-date position in terms of discussions on the garden centre, as expressed in the session this morning, then I think that adds further weight to the council's position of being confident that the whole site will come forward across the planned period.
Okay, can we then move on to Woodham Hall, HA2? Now, it's an implication of that allocation that the existing dwelling would be demolished. And I just wanted to check. I mean, you say very clearly in paragraph 7.20 that it's a large house of 1930s origin, which is now in a state of disrepair. I just wanted to check that there isn't kind of at the heart of that something that might have any remaining architectural or historical significance.
So on this particular site, the pre-application discussion process has been engaged for some time, and as far as I'm aware, the council's comments are part of that process, have not highlighted any heritage asset issues that would prevent the site coming forward in a way that we would find acceptable.
Okay. And that hasn't been raised as a concern for the parish council. Okay. And I note that additional site, and it is, just to be clear, within the site template, site 217 that's adjacent to that, which you've said that you don't have a major order objection to consideration of if additional consideration is required.
Sorry, sir. I was referring to the council not having an overriding concern. That was in respect of you allocating Highgate Hill.
Oh, apologies. Not 217.
That's right.
Okay, in which case, tell me about 217.
Thank you, sir.
It's a good, this is why oral hearings are a good thing.
I believe in the submissions earlier in the session, you were referred to the council's capacity document, which was looking at amongst a bundle of sites what that site might yield in terms of unit numbers were it found acceptable in all other matters. However, you will have seen from the site templates document, where the site is numbered 217, that the site was not identified to be allocated, and the council expresses in that assessment set out in the template a number of concerns which are derived from a number of considerations, but which include the topography of the site, the existence of trees of merit on the site, as well as its inclusion of a pond and concerns about biodiversity constraints. So the council has not previously promoted that site for allocation and continues not to promote allocation and continues to have a number of concerns regarding that site and the physical constraints which would apply in achieving a satisfactory form of development.
Fine. I'll have to put those two separate sets of submissions into the balance and weigh them up. Hawkhurst Castle, HA3, as I understand, is consented and under construction. I've driven past and it seemed to be a very busy site indeed.
That is correct, sir.
Okay. And I don't think I had any other remaining questions about the policy proposals for Hawkhurst or Gills Green or the Moor. But before I kind of let you off and go back around the room, what I did just want to do, which I know is to a certain extent revisiting territory that we've previously crossed in Matter A hearings, but I did just want to pull up David Weeks' written submission where he does raise individual concerns about the contribution to land supply of certain existing allocations proposals, such as Knight's Wood. Now, again, I know we've covered this previously orally, but my reason for returning to it is that individual representatives have had the opportunity to raise specific concerns about individual sites, and they've either done so and we've dealt with it, or they haven't, and we've passed those sites by. Knight's Wood has been site visited, it's also been heard. And I just thought I should provide you with an opportunity to respond to the concern that was raised about that site, to assist me to consider whether or not there's anything that I haven't previously been aware of or picked up.
Thank you, sir. As far as the council is concerned, I believe you've been alerted to all the issues, if I can call them that have been raised by the various respondents, particularly when we've been talking about housing figures and housing supply. The position of the council regarding Knights Park is that it's a scheme which is on the ground, is being developed actively at pace, and I believe has now secured its first occupations on the ground. And you have statements from that developer which confirm their intention to build out the rest of the site to a programme, and that they are confident of delivering the yearly output figures which have been stated. So I don't think we need to, in this session, provide any further information to you on that.
Okay, and then I will ask the same question about the Sandhurst Road site, what's being referred to in Mr. Weeks' submission as the Gasworks site, which again I'm familiar with. I've done an unaccompanied site inspection on 2 occasions at Sandhurst Road, and I've also done an accompanied site inspection at Knightswood. And anything there that we haven't previously discussed?
Nothing that we've not previously discussed, and just to remind you that this was one of the sites where Gladman were particularly commenting on its deliverability, and you will recall that in our supplementary statement on housing delivery, one of the scenarios set out in that document was a scenario which envisaged the Gasworks site not coming forward in the manner that we believe it would, but it was there as a testing scenario.
Indeed, and I'm conscious that has been explored. I think at this juncture, sufficient to say that you've raised doubts. You're not the only person who's raised doubts. I've asked the council for evidence in respect to both of those sites, summary positions in relation to which I've asked them to put again, simply so that you're conscious of what has gone on. But I will need to consider everything that they put to me in their Matter A and Matter A supplementary statements.
Could I just say, sir, there was also a concern about the various offices, Calverley House, Wellington House, and their conversion to residential, which I've actually done some work on. And if they're still included within the 5-year supply, it seems to me that they're unlikely to come forward in the time frame that the council expects.
Okay. Well, again, I will return to the council and put the same question to them, because again, we have covered this as well. Is there anything further there that I need to take account of, given the work that you've subsequently done following the hearing of Matter A?
I don't believe so, sir. And just so everybody is clear, in fact, there is an outstanding piece of homework which we are working on, so that there's further submissions going to be made in that document as well. So perhaps Mr. Weeks can keep an eye out for that emerging.
Indeed. Okay. I mean, in that respect, Mr. Weeks, and I'm just flipping across to the homework list, so-called. There will be issuing at some stage today a letter that sets out due dates of broadly the 11th of December for the council to deal with housing matter related homework, where there have been further questions that I've put to them about the evidence base for conclusions that development on particular sites will contribute towards their revised assessment of housing land supply, and that work, they will produce that on the 11th. If anybody has any comments on that, they are welcome until the 24th, and then the council themselves have until the 8th of January to put any final concluded remarks to me in writing about that work. So keep an eye after the 11th, and do please participate in that, because that, as I've said, that will be a written process. I don't anticipate at this juncture, unless something very surprising emerges, needing to reopen hearings. Now, drawing the council's position then to a close, you're content with the allocations that you're proposing. You don't believe it's necessary to allocate the Highgate Hill appeals site, and you've set out your view that site 217 shouldn't be allocated. Is there anything else you believe you need to say on Hawkhurst and its related daughter settlements?
No, nothing, sir.
Okay. Well, I am going to come back around the room. I do note that Countryside Properties wish to speak. Yes. CPRE, are you concluded this time? Hawkhurst Parish Council, are you likely to need to come back? You might. Okay, well, what I'll do is I'll deal with these two. I'll then provide you with an opportunity. The council, as is normal, have the right to make final concluding remarks in the light of everything else that's been said. So, Countryside Properties.
Thank you. There was a sinking moment having gone through a public inquiry that I thought site 217 was going to slip into the plan. Simple and easy. Just a couple of points of clarification. First, on the Bellway comments. Just wanted to be clear that we're not suggesting that Highgate Hill should go into the plan and Springfield Garden Centre or Woodham Hall should come out. We believe that Highgate Hill is needed to provide the flexibility. Essentially, we think Highgate Hill will deliver the numbers, the key numbers for Hawkhurst, and that Springfield will provide that flexibility and that buffer, and that there then doesn't become the reliance on it. If it comes through and delivers the extra housing or slightly over the housing requirement, all well and good. It's the successful reuse of a brownfield site within the limits to built development. Where we object is that we don't think it can be relied upon, and if you don't have Highgate Hill and that doesn't come forward, we don't reach the numbers that were planned for. So just to clarify that point. In respect of the need to allocate Highgate Hill, I have to say everything that I've heard from around the table makes me even more convinced that it does need to go into the plan. Again, I don't want to be unfair to anybody and pick up on detailed wording, but what I've heard is that landowners are talking, that they hope the sites will come forward and that they hope to overcome constraints. They hope that the road will clarify the situation and may focus minds. What to do with the commercial units on the site is still a question mark. I heard the term, there may be a deal to be done. All of these things, I know it's oral evidence. I don't want to be rude in terms of detailed wording, but it shows that this site is far from being certain and deliverability is far from being certain. And this comes back to what I said about the quality of the evidence base. And I'm afraid from the council's perspective, I still am unclear where this compelling evidence came from, where they had an evidence base that said Highgate Hill should be allocated and that Springfield Garden Centre wasn't deliverable. To what evidence, what changed to make it overwhelming justification to take Highgate Hill out the plan. I don't think it exists. I think it was purely a political decision outside of officers' hands, and that's why I believe that for deliverability purposes, Highgate Hill needs to go back into the plan. I think beyond that, just in brief response to the Parish Council, we heard the issues at the inquiry and understand where the parish are coming from 100%, and no, I think nobody takes the AONB release lightly. All I would say is that if we can guarantee that we deliver the numbers in Hawkhurst, then it reduces the risk of a future hostile application or a greenfield release. So again, I think it would actually be in the Parish Council's favour to allocate the site and provide the certainty that the numbers come forward. There was comments on traffic, and one thing we haven't touched on, which I'm hoping you don't want to go into too much technical detail, is the work was carried out as part of the inquiry process, testing some options in terms of measures that could be put in place at the junctions to improve the highway impact, and that included basically puffin technology to improve the system, and that's gone in. It's in our evidence, and I think the council's had it since the inquiry. I'm unsure whether or not it's been reviewed by KCC Highways, but it does show that there is capacity to improve that junction, not necessarily physically, but to make the most of fairly inexpensive puffin technology that will make a difference. And then the final point I just wanted to make was going back to your original question about the benefits of allocating a site if it's already likely to be under construction. And I just wanted to point out that there are several sites in the plan that have planning permission that are smaller that have still been reallocated. Obviously, Knights Park is a different situation because that's 500 odd units, but things like Good Station Road, which is AL/RTW17, is a site of 10 units that has planning permission, yet there's still been a need to allocate it again. So we just think a consistent approach, and that for absolute complete soundness purposes, that we think it's essential that Highgate Hill should go into the allocations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take that highways issue as it arises now, because I'm very conscious as well that Hawkhurst Parish Council raised the in-principle concern about the performance of the junction. I didn't specifically question it at that time because I was conscious of the council's statement PS/49, which includes correspondence from Kent County Council in Appendix 1, which in very broad summary terms says that Kent County Council are confirming that they have reconsidered their previous stance not to allow any additional development beyond the figure within the core strategy, and they consider that 287 units is within the operational capacity of the junction, but any further development in the town would require significant improvement to the junction in order to mitigate the effects of additional trips. So that's the position on the face of their correspondence. They didn't request to be involved today on a technical level, and I've taken away from that they don't have active ongoing concerns as a highway authority. But if I could ask that the council just pick that up in final concluding remarks and confirm whether or not that's a correct conclusion. Okay, now, Bellway and others.
Thank you, sir. Shall I start with Springfield very briefly?
Yeah.
I'm afraid I don't have, in answer to CPRE's comment, I'm afraid I don't have a housing mix here, but the development will provide a mix of units. I think the other point to make is that the site is highly constrained by policy EN22, which looks to preserve the tree belt down the south side of the proposed access road. It's a technical point, I think, and I might have completely got it wrong, and excuse me if I have, but policy EN22, which is referred to in the site allocations document under policy ALSTR2, but only as a cross-reference, in the appendix, it's not listed as a saved policy from the local plan. Now, I might have got that completely wrong, but it's not there, I don't think, in Appendix 1. I did make that point in my original submission.
Yes, you did. Yeah. Well, look, again, if I could ask Council just to...
Yeah, it's just a point of clarification.
Pick that up, because quite plainly, if it's not a safe policy, it's not a safe policy, and there are consequences.
Yeah,
We shouldn't be continuing to refer to it.
Turning to Site 217, we acknowledge that the topography is steep, and that does limit the development on the site. But work has been done on that, and we believe there's a capacity on the site there for, I don't know, between 6 and 8 dwellings. And in fact, the Council's own capacity document acknowledges the site's capacity for 8 units. There are no trees within the site. They're on the boundary, which helps screen the site from long-distance views. And the site, there are ecological issues, and the southern part of the site, which is the steepest, also contains a pond. And the landowner has always acknowledged that that pond ought to form part of extended public open space and form a link from the countryside through the site to the existing pond, which is of nature conservation interest. The ecological interest on the site is acknowledged and will be incorporated into any design. I think that's all I've got to say, sir. Thank you very much.
Now, if I can come to Hawkhurst Parish Council, I mean, don't feel compelled to reopen matters that have already been gone into, but if anything that you've heard in those two positions or in the Council's summary feels new and relevant to your position, then do feel free to put your position on it.
No, I think everything has been said. I mean, we accept the fact that we have planning permission on Highgate Hill, and we hope they do deliver as they said. In preference, we would have preferred 217, in as much as 217 is just brambles, Highgate Hill is productive agricultural land. But we accept the decision that the planning authorities made. So I think we made ourselves clear, and thank you very much.
Indeed, and you know, it's trite to say so, but once planning permission's been granted, c'est la vie, and I can't undo that. So you are where you are. Moving then back to the Council, final responses to what has just been put. We've got a reference to an unsafe policy that would be really helpful if we can just pin.
Yes, thank you, sir. The policy is saved, and it's and given that it is saved, it's not referred to in Table 1 of the DPD, which is the table which sets out the policies which are no longer saved. But it is a saved policy. The other point you made was about Kent County Council as Highway Authority, and their position, as you summarised it, is correct and is stated in the letter that we've included.
Thank you very much. Well, unless there are any other matters that arise in relation to Hawkhurst, Highgate, the Moor, or Gills Green, I think that brings the business that was appointed for this morning to a close. This afternoon we'll move on to matter I, the villages and rural areas. Now, at that point, we will then have reached the end of the individual chapters of the plan. And so what my view was when we originally drafted the agenda was that we'd have some sort of a stock take at that point and look at all of the various actions. However, the world has moved on since then, and we've got hearings tomorrow on matter A again, and institutional use, C2 use. So I'm not proposing to do that stock take until after we have done everything. So once we've done villages and rural areas, essentially that's the end of today's business. Okay, then, ladies and gentlemen, let's stop now. Let's resume at 2 p.m. and we will hear villages and rural areas. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.